Paul VI Address, April 11, 1973. Always anxious to safeguard, above everything else, the primacy of man. In his Angelus Address, January 27, 1974, Paul VI spoke positively of, quote, the cult of man for man's sake. Paul VI Address, February 15, 1974. As Your Excellency has rightly recalled, that the final aim is man. Paul VI Address, December 29, 1968. The Christian mystery which rests on man. Paul VI Audience, April 28, 1969. In the final analysis, there are no true riches but man. Paul VI Angelus Address, July 20, 1969. We would do well to meditate on man. Paul VI Address, October 16, 1976. If the gospel is for man, we Christians are completely for the gospel. Notice that he only says that we are for the gospel if the gospel is for man. Paul VI Address, December 4, 1976. Above all ideological conditionings, the greatness and dignity of the human person must emerge as the only value to promote and defend. Paul VI Christmas Message, December 25, 1976. Let us honor fallen and sinful humanity. Paul VI Speech, June 10, 1969. For in the final analysis, there is no true riches but the riches of man. Paul VI on Christmas. Paul VI General Audience, December 17, 1969. Christmas is the birthday of life, of our life. Christmas is the birthday of Jesus Christ. It is not the birthday of our life, because we are not Jesus Christ. But this is what Paul VI is preaching. Paul VI Angelus Address, December 21, 1974. A Merry Christmas to you. It is the feast of human life. Paul VI Christmas Message, December 25, 1976. Brethren, let us honor in the birth of Christ the incipient life of man. The word incipient means beginning, in an initial stage. So Paul VI is saying that in the birth of Christ we find the beginning stages of the life of man. This clearly means that man is Christ. Paul VI Angelus Message, December 18, 1976. Christmas is a feast of mankind, dedicated as a happy effect to honor human existence. Paul VI preaching that man is God. Paul VI Message, December 20, 1968. We live in the era of hope. It is, however, a hope in the kingdom of this earth, a hope in human self-sufficiency. According to Paul VI, the hope is not in God or his kingdom, but in human self-sufficiency. Paul VI General Audience, August 16, 1972. Man is master of himself. He is free who is the cause of himself. Man is not the cause of himself. God creates man. Paul VI Speech, September 12, 1970. The only word which explains man is God himself made man, the Word made flesh. This clearly means that man is God himself made man, our Lord Jesus Christ. Pope Pius X, E Supremi Apostolatus, October 4, 1903. The distinguishing mark of Antichrist. Man has with infinite temerity put himself in the place of God. Other changes made by Paul VI. On November 13, 1964, Paul VI gave away the Triple Crown Papal Tiara. Paul VI had the tiara auctioned at the New York World's Fair. The Papal Tiara is a sign of a true Pope's authority, the three crowns representing the dogmatic, liturgical, and disciplinary authority of a Pope. By giving it away, Paul VI was symbolically giving away the authority of the papacy, although he had none to give away since he was actually an anti-pope. But it was a symbolic act of how he was a satanic infiltrator, whose whole mission was to attempt to destroy the Catholic Church. Paul VI was also seen many times wearing the breastplate of the ephod, also known as the rationale of judgment of a Jewish high priest. Notice the 12 stones which represent the 12 tribes of Israel. Not only is this the breastplate of a Jewish high priest, but according to the Encyclopedia of Freemasonry by Mackey, the ephod is also, quote, worn in the Masonic American chapters of the Royal Arch by the high priest as an official part of his official ornaments. The ephod was the vestment that was worn by Caiaphas, the high priest of the Jewish religion, who ordered our Lord Jesus Christ to be put to death by crucifixion. Antipope Paul VI wore the breastplate of the ephod, also known as the rationale of judgment of the high priest, numerous times. God allows things such as this to come out to show the people that this man was an infiltrator and an enemy of the Catholic Church. Antipope Paul VI was the man who authoritatively implemented the false Second Vatican Council, changed the Catholic Mass into a Protestant service, and changed the rite of every single sacrament. He changed the matter or form of the Eucharist, extreme unction, holy orders, and confirmation. Antipope Paul VI wanted to put Christ to death in the Mass by removing it and replacing it with a counterfeit, and wanted to kill his Catholic Church by attempting to change the Church completely. Within 2 years of the close of Vatican II, Paul VI removed the Index of Forbidden Books, a decision one commentator rightly called incomprehensible. Paul VI then abolished the oath against modernism, at a time when modernism was flourishing as never before. Paul VI disestablished the papal court, disbanded the Noble Guard, and the Palatine Guards. Paul VI abolished the rite of tonsure, all 4 minor orders, and the rank of subdiaconate. Paul VI removed solemn exorcisms from the baptismal rite. In the place of the solemn exorcisms, he substituted an optional prayer that makes only a passing reference to fighting the devil. Paul VI granted more than 32,000 requests from priests who had asked to be released from their vows and returned to the lay status, the greatest exodus from the priesthood since the Reformation. Paul VI's disastrous influence was visible immediately. For example, in Holland, not a single candidate applied for admission to the priesthood in 1970, and within 12 months every seminary there was closed. Spiritual destruction was everywhere. Countless millions left the church. Countless others ceased practicing the faith and confessing their sins. And while Paul VI was the cause of this unrelenting disaster and spiritual destruction, like the sly serpent he was, he calculatingly misdirected the attention away from himself. In perhaps his most famous quote, he noted that Satan's smoke had made its way into the temple of God. Paul VI homily, June 29, 1972. Satan's smoke has made its way into the temple of God through some crack. When Paul VI made this statement, everyone looked at the cardinals, the bishops, and the priests to discover where this smoke of Satan might be. They looked at everyone except the man who made the statement. But Paul VI was actually the smoke of Satan, and he made the statement to misdirect people away from himself, which he was successful in doing. And what is perhaps most frightening is that Paul VI's famous statement is basically a direct reference to Apocalypse 9 verses 1 through 3. And there was given to him the key of the bottomless pit, and he opened the bottomless pit, and the smoke of the pit arose, as the smoke of a great furnace. In Apocalypse 9 we see a direct reference to the smoke of Satan, and to someone who is given the key to unleash it. Antipope Paul VI did not have the keys of Peter, but he was given the key to the bottomless pit. He was the one who brought in the smoke of Satan from the great furnace, as he says, from some crack. Jean Guiton, an intimate friend of Paul VI, related what Paul VI said at the final session of Vatican II. It was the final session of the council, Guiton wrote, the most essential, in which Paul VI was to bestow on all humanity the teachings of the council. He announced this to me on that day with these words, "I am about to blow the 7 trumpets of the apocalypse." Paul VI speech to Lombard Seminary, December 7, 1968. The Church finds herself in an hour of disquiet, of self-criticism, one might say even of self-destruction. The Church is wounding herself. Here, Antipope Paul VI again mocks the people. He says the Church is in, quote, self-destruction and is, quote, wounding herself. He is referring to himself